Clara sat by the window, watching the rain beat against the glass as she held the phone in her hand, unable to move. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the news settling over her like a heavy fog. Her sister, Ellie, had just told her something that made no sense, something she couldn't believe, something that threatened to tear apart everything they had known. "I sold the beach house," Ellie had said, her voice matter-of-fact, almost cold. Clara had stared at the phone, trying to process the words. "What do you mean, you sold it?" Her voice was barely a whisper, as though the words alone could shatter her. Ellie sighed impatiently on the other end. "I mean exactly what I said, Clara. I sold it. The developer offered a good price, and I thought it was the best thing for both of us. You never really cared about the house anyway. It's just a bunch of old memories. We need to move on." The words hit Clara like a slap to the face. Move on? The beach house was more than just a collection of memories. It was their legacy, the last tangible connection to their family's history and to their grandmother, who had passed away just a few months ago. It was the place where they had spent summers together, where Clara and Ellie had shared their childhood, their dreams, their secrets. The house had been theirs, a symbol of family, of love, and of tradition. "Ellie, how could you?" Clara's voice trembled, a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me? You can't just sell it without consulting me. It was ours, not just yours." There was a long pause on the other end, and Clara could almost hear Ellie's exasperated sigh, like she was explaining something to a child. "I thought you'd understand. It's just a house, Clara. It's not like it's going to bring Grandma back. I didn't think you'd be so attached to it." The words stung, and Clara could feel the anger rising in her chest. "It's not just about Grandma. It's about our family, Ellie. It's about what she wanted for us. You didn't even think to ask me, to talk to me about it. You just went ahead and made the decision on your own, without even telling me. I didn't think it mattered. You've been distant ever since Grandma died. You haven't really been around. You never even came to visit the house after the funeral. I'm the one who's been dealing with it. You've been busy with your life, and I thought I was doing what was best." Clara felt a sharp pang of guilt at the accusation, but it didn't change the fact that Ellie had acted without any consideration for her. She couldn't understand it. How could Ellie, her own sister, do this? The two of them had always been close, had always shared everything. Their grandmother had raised them both after their parents died when they were young. The beach house had been a place where they could escape, where they could breathe. It had been their safe haven, a place that represented not just their grandmother's love, but their own bond as sisters. "How could you sell it without telling me?" Clara asked again, her voice now a mix of desperation and anger. "It's ours, Ellie. You had no right." "I had every right," Ellie shot back, her tone defensive now but still uncaring. "We inherited it. It's not like we needed it. I'm doing what's best for us. We can get something better, something more modern. With the money, we can invest it in something that actually makes sense." Clara didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened and she could feel tears welling in her eyes. How could she not understand? She thought back to all the times they had spent there. Summer nights playing games on the porch, mornings spent fishing with their grandmother. The laughter and love that had filled those walls. It wasn't just a house. It was the memory of their entire childhood, the memory of their family. To Ellie, it seemed to mean nothing. "You're not thinking this through, Ellie," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've just ruined everything. That house was part of us. You don't understand what you've done." But Ellie's voice, when it came, was final. "I don't think you're seeing it, Clara. We need to let go. You need to let go. I've already signed the papers. It's done. You can't undo it." Clara felt the ground beneath her feet seem to shift, as if the earth itself had betrayed her. She hung up the phone without another word. The room around her seemed suddenly too quiet, too still. Her hands were shaking and she had to sit down, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "It's done," Ellie had said, but Clara couldn't accept that. She couldn't just let it go. Her mind raced, replaying the conversation over and over again. How could Ellie do this to me? To us? She felt the sting of betrayal deep in her chest. They had always been a team, always been there for each other. But now, it felt as though Ellie had abandoned her, made a decision that affected both of them without even giving her a say. Clara couldn't understand how Ellie could have done this without any remorse, without even trying to understand why the house meant so much to Clara. The truth was, Clara had always known her sister had a different perspective on things. Ellie had always been the more practical one, the one who made decisions based on logic, on what seemed right in the moment. But Clara had always been the dreamer, the one who held on to the past, who cherished the little things, the memories, the moments, the places. Clara knew that the house was more than just bricks and mortar to her. It was a piece of her childhood, a link to everything they had lost, everything they had loved. But Ellie didn't see it that way. To Ellie, the beach house was just a burden, something that held them back from moving forward. Clara couldn't help but wonder how long Ellie had been thinking about selling it. Had she known for months and simply not told her? Or had this been a spur-of-the-moment decision, a way for her to rid herself of something that no longer served a purpose in her life? As the hours passed, Clara's anger slowly morphed into a dull, aching sorrow. She felt lost, adrift, as though the ground beneath her had been yanked out from under her. She reached for her phone again, but this time she didn't call Ellie. She needed time to process, time to think, to figure out how to handle this. But what could she do? Ellie had made her decision. It was done. But Clara wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't accept that the house was gone, couldn't accept that it would be replaced with a shiny new building or that someone else would be living in the place that had been her sanctuary for so many years. It felt like a violation, like a piece of her heart had been ripped away. And so, despite the gnawing fear that Ellie would never forgive her for questioning her decision, Clara made a vow to herself. She would fight to get the house back. She didn't know how, but she would. She wouldn't let Ellie's recklessness be the end of it. The beach house was more than just a house. It was theirs, and as long as there was breath in her body, Clara wasn't going to let anyone take that away. Clara spent the following days in a daze. The world around her seemed to blur as her thoughts replayed the conversation with Ellie over and over again. She had always known that her sister was pragmatic, focused on the present and future. Ellie had never been the nostalgic type. She was always looking ahead, trying to make decisions based on practicality rather than sentimentality. But this, selling the beach house, the one place that had held so many of their family's memories, this was something Clara could not comprehend. To Ellie, it was just an old house, something that needed to be sold to move on, but Clara couldn't let go of it. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of everything that had mattered to them. The summers spent with their grandmother, the laughter they shared, the peace they found in the quiet of the beach. It was a part of them. The days passed slowly, and Clara found herself unable to focus on anything. She could barely make it through a full workday, distracted by the hollow feeling that gnawed at her. She knew that she needed to talk to Ellie, to resolve this, but the thought of confronting her again filled Clara with dread. Their last conversation had left Clara feeling betrayed and alone. What had happened to the bond they had once shared? What happened to the sisters who had promised to always have each other's backs? In the midst of her spiraling thoughts, Clara found herself sitting at her grandmother's desk one afternoon, absent-mindedly leafing through old papers. It wasn't that she was looking for anything in particular. She just needed something to hold on to, something that would remind her of the way things used to be. Before Ellie had made her decision to sell the beach house, the desk was cluttered with old receipts, faded photographs, and random mementos from a life well lived. The familiar scent of paper and ink, mixed with the faint trace of lavender that always lingered in the house, calmed Clara, even if just for a moment. As she sifted through the papers, her fingers brushed against an envelope that was wedged between two books on the bottom shelf of the desk. Clara froze, curiosity tugging at her. It was an old, yellowed envelope, sealed with a bit of faded wax. There was no address, no name, just the simple phrase, "For Clara and Ellie," written in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. Clara had never seen this envelope before. It wasn't like her grandmother to keep secrets, especially from her grandchildren. but something about the way the envelope had been tucked away, hidden beneath a pile of other papers, made Clara feel uneasy. Her hand shook as she carefully peeled away the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. Legal-sized, old, and crinkled at the edges. It looked like some sort of formal document, but Clara could barely make sense of the handwriting. It was clear that her grandmother had written it herself, in her delicate, almost whimsical script. Clara's eyes scanned the paper quickly, but as she read, her heart sank into her stomach. It was a clause from her grandmother's will, something Clara had never seen before. It wasn't a part of the standard will they had all read after her grandmother's passing. This was something different, something that had been hidden, deliberately kept away from the rest of the family. The document was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. The beach house, known as the Cottage by the Sea, shall remain in the possession of Clara and Ellie and cannot be sold or transferred to any third party without the agreement of both sisters. In the event that one sister attempts to sell the property without the consent of the other, the house shall revert to the family trust, to be held and managed for the benefit of future generations. The intention is for the house to remain in the family, a place of gathering and remembrance, for as long as possible. This clause is to be considered binding and final, regardless of any subsequent changes to the sisters' personal relationships. Clara reread the words again, her hands trembling as she tried to absorb the full impact of what she was reading. This wasn't just some passing wish of her grandmother's, this was a legally binding document. The beach house had never truly belonged to either Clara or Ellie alone. It was a shared asset, and the clause made it clear that neither of them could sell it without the other's consent. More importantly, if one of them did try to sell it unilaterally, the house would revert to the family trust. The intention behind this clause was clear. The house was to remain in the family for as long as possible. A legacy to be passed down through generations. A wave of disbelief washed over Clara. She had to read the clause a few more times to fully grasp its significance. How could Ellie not know about this? Had she never come across this document? Or had she simply ignored it, choosing to act on her own without regard for their grandmother's wishes? Clara sat back in her chair, the weight of the revelation settling heavily on her shoulders. Her grandmother had always been a woman of strong convictions, but she had also been deeply sentimental. Clara remembered how, even in her final years, her grandmother had talked about the beach house with such affection. It had been a place of refuge for their family, a place where memories were made and cherished. To sell it, to let it slip away into the hands of strangers, would have been anathema to her. And yet, Ellie had done it. She had sold it without even considering what their grandmother had wanted. But now, Clara had something to hold on to, something that could change everything. The clause gave her the legal grounds to challenge Ellie's decision, to take back what had been so carelessly given away. Clara felt a mix of anger and resolve. I have to do this, she thought. I have to protect the house. It's the only thing left of Grandma, the only piece of her that I can hold on to. Clara immediately began to think of how to proceed. She couldn't let Ellie get away with this, not when their grandmother's wishes were so clear. But at the same time, she knew that this wouldn't be an easy battle. Ellie had already signed the papers, and the house had likely already changed hands. There would be legal hurdles, obstacles to overcome. But Clara was determined. The house meant too much to her, and she couldn't let it go without a fight. As Clara sat there, the weight of the document in her hands, she realized that this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the bond between her and Ellie, the relationship they had shared for so long. The beach house was a symbol of that bond, and Ellie's betrayal had threatened to break it. But Clara wasn't ready to give up on her sister. Not yet. She knew that this situation would test them both, that it would push them to their limits. But she also knew that they had the potential to come out of this stronger if they could somehow find their way back to each other. Clara carefully folded the document and placed it back into the envelope, tucking it away in her bag. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let Ellie's mistake stand. She had a plan now, a way forward. And she was going to make sure that their grandmother's legacy wasn't lost, that the beach house would stay in their family, no matter what it took. Clara had spent the following week in a quiet, determined fury. The discovery of her grandmother's hidden claws had given her the clarity and motivation she needed, but it also brought with it a growing sense of urgency. There was no time to waste. Ellie had sold the house, their house, and Clara now had the means to stop it, or at least reverse the decision. The clause from their grandmother's will was a lifeline, but it was one that Clara knew she would have to hold tightly and defend with everything she had. Clara had always been a woman of conviction, but even she knew that taking on Ellie in a legal battle would be no small feat. She wasn't just fighting for a house, she was fighting for the very essence of her family's history, for the memories and the bond that the beach house represented. But Ellie wasn't going to give up without a fight either. Clara could already hear the echoes of her sister's voice, defensive and unwavering. She could already see the way Ellie would try to justify what she'd done, how she would rationalize her decision to sell. But Clara couldn't back down. Not now. She spent hours researching the legal details of the clause, poring over old documents and reaching out to family lawyers who could offer her advice. With each passing day, her resolve grew stronger. Clara couldn't believe that Ellie, of all people, could have done something like this. She had never expected to be at odds with her sister over something so important, but here they were, on opposite sides of a battle that Clara knew would strain their relationship forever. The decision to call Ellie wasn't an easy one. Clara had been avoiding her sister, unable to stomach another conversation where Ellie would justify the sale of the house. But now, there was no avoiding it. Clara needed to speak with her, and she needed to do it now. It was late in the afternoon when Clara dialed Ellie's number. Her heart was racing as the phone rang. She tried to steady her breath, but the tension in her chest made it hard to focus. When Ellie finally picked up, there was a noticeable coldness in her voice, a distance that Clara hadn't heard before. "Clara," Ellie said, her voice clipped. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Is everything okay?" Clara hesitated for a moment, but then the words came tumbling out. "No, Ellie, everything is not okay. I found it. The clause. The one from Grandma's will. The one about the beach house." There was a long silence on the other end, and Clara could practically hear the wheels turning in Ellie's mind. When Ellie spoke again, her voice was low, almost defensive. "Clara, I don't know why you're bringing this up now. It's done. The house is sold. There's no going back." Clara clenched her fists, feeling the surge of anger rise in her chest. "You can't just dismiss it, Ellie. This clause is legally binding. Grandma made it clear that neither of us could sell the house without the other's consent. If one of us tried, the house would revert to the family trust." "I didn't know about that clause," Ellie shot back quickly, her voice rising. "How was I supposed to know? You didn't even care about the house. I've been the one taking care of everything since Grandma died. I was trying to do what was best." "Ellie, you sold it without talking to me," Clara's voice cracked as the frustration bubbled to the surface. "You didn't even think to ask me to see if I felt the same way. You just went ahead and did it. You betrayed me." "I didn't betray you," Ellie countered, her voice laced with a mixture of anger and guilt. "I thought I was doing what was right. The house was just sitting there, taking up space. It was costing us money, and I—" "Stop!" Clara interrupted, feeling tears sting at the back of her eyes. "You don't understand. It's not just a house, Ellie. It's Grandma's legacy. It's our family. You don't just sell it like it's nothing. You don't get to make that decision on your own." "I didn't think you cared that much about it," Ellie said, her tone softening slightly but still defensive. "You were never there. You never visited after Grandma passed away. You've been so distant. I thought you were over it." Clara's chest tightened. Ellie's words cut deep, but she knew there was some truth to them. Clara hadn't been around as much after their grandmother's death. She had gotten lost in her own life, in her own struggles, and had distanced herself from the house and the memories it held. But that didn't mean it didn't matter to her. It didn't mean she didn't care. It had just been hard, too hard, to face it all without Grandma there. "I wasn't over it, Ellie," Clara whispered. "I just didn't know how to deal with it. But that doesn't mean you can make this decision for both of us." Ellie's silence on the other end was heavy, and Clara could hear her sister breathing deeply, as if trying to gather her thoughts. Finally, Ellie spoke, but her voice was different now. It was quieter, more measured. "Clara, I didn't know about the clause. If I had, maybe I would have handled things differently, Ellie admitted, though there was still a sense of reluctance in her voice. But it's done now. The house is sold. I don't think there's anything we can do to change that. Clara shook her head, feeling a lump form in her throat. There is something we can do, Ellie. I'm taking this to court. What? Ellie's voice shot up in disbelief. Clara, you're going to sue me? I'm not suing you, Clara replied firmly, her voice steady. I'm suing the developer. We'll get the house back. I'll prove that the sale wasn't valid because of Grandma's clause, and I'll make sure it gets returned to the family trust. There was a long pause before Ellie spoke again, her voice low and filled with regret. Clara, please. You don't have to do this. We're sisters. I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to fight either, Clara said softly, her heart aching. But this is something I have to do. It's not just about the house, Ellie. It's about what it represents. It's about honoring Grandma's memory. And you're right. Maybe I haven't been there like I should have, but I'm here now. And I'm not letting go of this. The line went quiet again, and Clara could feel the tension thickening between them. Ellie's reluctance was palpable, but so was Clara's determination. The conversation wasn't over, and neither of them was ready to back down. I'll talk to a lawyer, Ellie finally said, her voice resigned. But Clara, if this goes to court, it could ruin everything between us. It could ruin our relationship. Do you really want that? I don't want to ruin anything, Ellie, Clara said, her voice breaking. But I can't just let you take this away from me. It's all I have left of Grandma, and I'm not letting you sell it without a fight. The conversation ended with the silence hanging between them. Clara felt as if a weight had been lifted, but also a new, heavier weight had replaced it. The path forward was clear, but it would not be easy. Ellie had made her decision, but Clara had her grandmother's secret weapon in the form of the clause. Now the legal battle would begin. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Ellie both hired lawyers. The conflict escalated quickly. Clara's lawyer, an older woman named Susan, was firm and experienced, and she reassured Clara that the clause was ironclad. If they could prove that the sale had violated the clause, they could get the house back. But Ellie's lawyer was equally determined, and Clara knew that this would be a fight that would test everything she believed in. She had already seen how determined Ellie was to stand her ground, and now, with the legal framework in place, the battle was no longer just about the beach house. It was about their relationship, their trust, and whether they could ever heal the rift that had grown between them. Claire had no illusions that this would be an easy fight, but she also knew that she couldn't back down. The house was worth fighting for, and so was the bond with her sister. If she could find a way to repair it after all this. The weeks that followed the phone call between Clara and Ellie were a whirlwind of legal battles, tense meetings, and long, sleepless nights. Both sisters had hired their respective lawyers, and soon enough the case was making its way through the legal system. Clara had hoped that eventually Ellie would see reason, that they would be able to work out a solution without going through the stress and strain of a courtroom, but as the case developed, the chances of that seemed to grow slimmer. Clara threw herself into the legal proceedings, consulting with her lawyer, Susan, daily. Every document, every bit of evidence had to be carefully examined, every angle explored. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about what was right. It was about honoring their grandmother's wishes, about standing up for something that truly mattered to them. But with each passing day, Clara's hope of a peaceful resolution seemed to fade. Ellie, on the other hand, was growing more distant. Clara had expected her sister to be upset, but she had underestimated just how hard Ellie would fight. The younger woman was nothing if not determined, and the sale of the beach house was, in her mind, final. She had already signed the papers, and now she had to answer to the developer, to the buyer, and to herself. She had never intended for things to go this far. She had never expected Clara to take legal action. But once Clara had made her decision, there was no turning back. The trust between them had been broken in ways that could not be easily mended. The case was set to go to court in early December. Clara felt the pressure mounting as the date grew closer. She had done everything she could to prepare, but the uncertainty still gnawed at her. Would they win? Would they get the house back? Or would Ellie's decisions stand, and would the beach house, with all of its memories, slip into the hands of strangers? The thought of that was unbearable. The house was too important. It wasn't just a building. It was the heart of everything they had shared as a family. One cold morning, Clara received an unexpected phone call. It was from Ellie's lawyer, a man named Richard Allen, who had been handling the defense. Clara's first instinct was to ignore the call. She had spent the last few weeks avoiding direct communication with Ellie, and the thought of speaking to one of her sister's representatives was not something she welcomed. But something in the lawyer's voice made her pause. He sounded more serious than usual, and there was an edge to his words that made Clara's heart race. "Miss Landon, I believe it's time for you and Miss Ellis to sit down and have a conversation," Richard said, his tone measured. "This is becoming more than just a legal matter. It's tearing the family apart, and I believe there is a way for both of you to walk away from this without further damage." Clara was taken aback by the lawyer's words. She had expected him to be combative, to defend Ellie's actions without question. But instead, he was speaking in a way that suggested there might be room for resolution. Clara hesitated before responding. "What are you proposing?" Richard's voice softened, and he explained that Ellie had been struggling with the situation more than Clara realized. She had never wanted things to go this far, but she felt cornered. She didn't want to lose her sister, but she also couldn't simply undo everything she had already done. The lawyer suggested that they meet in person with their lawyers present and try to reach a settlement before the case went to court. At first, Clara wasn't sure she could handle sitting across from Ellie again. The betrayal still stung too much. But as Richard spoke, something inside Clara shifted. She realized that, despite everything, she still loved her sister. They were family. And family was worth fighting for, even when things seemed impossible. Clara agreed to the meeting. They scheduled it for the following week at a neutral location, a small law office in the city. Clara could already feel the knot tightening in her stomach at the thought of seeing Ellie face to face again. But there was also a flicker of hope. Maybe this was their chance to fix things. Maybe this was the beginning of healing, of finding their way back to each other. The day of the meeting arrived, and Clara tried to calm her nerves. She had rehearsed everything she wanted to say, but she knew that, in the heat of the moment, things could easily spiral. She arrived at the office early, hoping to collect her thoughts before the others arrived. It was a quiet space with minimal decoration, a stark contrast to the chaos Clara felt inside. When Ellie walked in, her eyes immediately met Clara's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words and unresolved tension. Ellie was the first to break the silence. "Clara," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "I didn't want it to be like this. I never meant to hurt you." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and looked her sister in the eyes. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, she nodded. "I know you didn't, Ellie, but you still did. You made a decision without even talking to me. You didn't consider what Grandma wanted or what I wanted. You just did it." "I thought I was doing what was best for us," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "I didn't realize how much it meant to you. I never understood how much that house—" "I know I could order this fucking food. I can't eat a fucking thing. I never understood how much Ahos was. Ahos was boredom, bastard." Clara could hear the sincerity in her sister's voice, and it made her heart ache. They had been through so much together, and it had taken this awful fight to bring them back to this point. But Clara knew that words, though important, couldn't undo the damage that had been done. Still, there was something in her that wanted to believe Ellie, wanted to believe that they could find a way out of this mess. Richard and Susan, both seated on opposite sides of the table, were silent, giving the sisters space to talk. Clara and Ellie exchanged a few more words, but it became clear that they couldn't resolve everything in one meeting. However, after much back and forth, they reached a tentative agreement. Ellie would work with Clara to reverse the sale, and the family trust would take over the beach house once more. But in exchange, Clara would agree to help Ellie financially with some of the costs Ellie had incurred in preparing the house for sale. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step toward rebuilding their relationship. As the meeting ended and the two sisters walked out of the office together, there was a long pause. Neither of them spoke, but the tension had eased. They both knew that it wasn't over, that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but they also knew that they had taken the first step toward reconciliation. The beach house would stay in the family, but it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about their bond, their history, and their future together. As Clara and Ellie drove home, side by side, neither spoke at first. But as they neared the familiar stretch of road that led to the beach, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The house was still there, nestled against the shoreline, just as it always had been. And maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild the foundation of their family, brick by brick, memory by memory. When they pulled up to the beach house, Clara turned to Ellie and said softly, "I'm glad we're doing this. I'm glad we're not giving up on each other." Ellie smiled, her eyes a little red. "Me too, Clara. Me too." And for the first time in months, Clara felt a sense of hope. They weren't out of the woods yet. There would be more conversations to have, more pain to work through. But together, they could make it through. The beach house, their grandmother's legacy, and their relationship were all worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, they would be able to rebuild something stronger than before.